Hey guys, it's Gary. I'm back again. Today with a short one. Actually, the reason I'm doing this is I'm really not ready to do another epic marathon yet. I have a couple things that I want to do that are coming up. Something I'm also waiting to receive an order in the mail that I'll talk about when I get it, which is more of a probably like an artist profile thing because I have a bunch of discs by this one person. But today, in lieu of not doing anything at all for another several days, I decided to do a relatively simple short one, and trust me, this will be short. No hour marathon. Just basically showing what I've been listening to in the last week or so, what I'm currently listening to. Figured I could do that from time to time, especially to fill in maybe gaps between some of my more epics, or even when I run out of epics to do. So these are things that will be either things that I've had or just newly acquired, but pretty much what I'm listening to now. And most of these I've already talked about a little bit or shown, well, starting off, actually, Axel had sent me this, Dvorak, New World Symphony for the New World, and I did a VCLT thank you video on that, and that's one of the things that's on a regular rotation, because it's one of the few new things that I've had, so that's been in my rotation lately. And I've been bad. I have spent money recently, and I'll be talking about one of the things that I bought here, but I got stuff that's coming probably within the next couple days, and I'll talk about it then. I went to my vinyl. Well, as I was looking through to do my last videos, looking for vinyl of the guys in Oregon and Colin Walcott, which vinyls I didn't find. Paul McCandless, I didn't find all the vinyl. So just the various things where I wasn't coming up with the vinyls, though. I did come across this album, Anthony Davis, Middle Passage. And, you know, the funny thing is I remembered nothing about the album except for the cover. Now, just from me having to pack up and move a couple years ago, I remember seeing the cover. Probably saw it, when I was at my old place, just by flipping through my collection. But remembered really nothing about the album. And Anthony Davis, a fairly young guy in his early 30s when this was recorded in New York in 1984. And I will say, Anthony Davis, right here from New Jersey, probably, I'm guessing, probably has a nice teaching career going on, because he actually studied at Yale and Wesleyan universities, and was associated with the kind of new avant-garde, Leroy Jenkins, Leo Smith, Anthony Braxton. So pretty much a member of Anthony Braxton, probably a little bit older, but Leroy Jenkins, Leo Smith, those guys were, he was probably like the young guy in that group when he was playing and associated with these people. This is primarily, he's a pianist, this is primarily solo piano, and I remember nothing about it. And I have other Anthony Davis albums, which are still back in my storage. And he was recording for Gramavision at the time. When Gramavision came out in the late 80s, and they didn't last long. It was one of those labels like Narada, kind of, that really came and went fast. But Gramavision was one of those labels that I got interested in, very much like an American ECM. I think that was what they were going for. And an American ECM in terms of probably the more esoteric, avant-garde, modern classical essence of ECM, because they did recordings that were things like trio of piano, cello, and flute, and it was new works. Anthony Davis was fairly prominent on the label, but man, Gramavision just went away really fast. This was recorded in '84. I bought this, and this is one where I took the receipt there, stuck it inside the jacket, so I knew exactly when I bought it. July 16th, 1987, I bought it. And I'm kind of sorry because this did come out on CD, and it seems like the CDs are probably fairly rare of this. When I'm going online looking at these, I'm seeing primarily old LPs for sale. This is long out of print. Very, very, very few copies on CD, outrageous prices, and I'm dying to get this on CD now that I've listened to it. And I played this again, and I haven't played anything on my turntable until a few weeks ago, actually. I haven't played anything on my turntable for several years. And I copied a few things several weeks ago into my computer that were a bunch of albums, like a Charlie Mariano album that had never come out on CD. And that was the first time since I moved here that I've played anything on my turntable. So that's well over 2 years ago, and probably another year or more before that, since even at my old place I wasn't playing much on the turntable. I pretty much only play albums really to copy them into my computer and to listen to them there. I decided to do that with this. It took 3 tries because I did have some bad crackles and pops on the vinyl. Anthony Davis writes 3 of the 4 tracks on here, and I didn't even remember what to expect. I was expecting probably avant-garde jazz with a little bit of bebop in there, some mainstream jazz, but what it is pretty purely a modern classical avant-garde album. It's not pounding on the keys. It's not like a Cecil Taylor thing, but you know, it's not that wild, but it's very interesting. It's nice. It's not quiet, but it's not raucous stuff. I liked it enough that I copied it into my computer, which I hate. It's such a pain in the ass to do that. Copy the files in your computer, and then you have to split them into tracks. And if you get, if this were pop music, I would never bother, with 10 or 12 tracks on an album. Thankfully, there's only 4 tracks on here, because the more tracks there are on a vinyl album that you're copying to your computer, the more you have to chop up the final file, because I just do both sides in one big 40-something minute file, and then you have to divide them up into tracks. It's a big pain in the ass, and I generally dislike doing it so intensely that I end up doing, my average is maybe 1 album every 2 years. If there's any way on earth that it's possible to get these things on CD, I'll do it to avoid having the copy over my vinyl. Plus, the vinyls are always worn. But when I played this, the weird thing is, besides the cover, I have no recollection of this whatsoever. I must have played it. I had heard this kind of music back then, but probably at the time that I bought it, probably wasn't what I wanted to hear necessarily, what I wasn't in the mood for, and I probably had a bunch of other releases, so this got pushed back in the closet. Unfortunately, still the vinyl is kind of a crappy printing, because I know I didn't play it much. A lot of pops, crackles, that kind of thing. I copied it into my computer, split it up into the 4 tracks that are on the album. Should have looked on YouTube first. The whole damn album is on YouTube in much better sonic quality than I have on my vinyl. I think the YouTube copy of it is from a CD. And I went looking online for CD copies, and first of all, it's out of print. Second of all, CD copies, even the used ones, are outrageous. I think there was very few printed up. I'm not sure. This was originally released in, I think, the copyright date is 84. It was recorded in 84, came out probably late 84, early 85. That's a little iffy as far as whether or not the CD originally came out at the same time as the vinyl, or whether it came out a couple of years later. Because I pretty much jumped into CDs fairly early, within a very short time of them coming out. So I don't know why I didn't buy this on CD instead. And I'm sorry I didn't, because, especially with solo piano and something that has no drums or anything on it, vinyl noise is a killer as far as the enjoyment of the music. 3 of the tracks, all fairly avant-garde, but in a really nice way, written by Anthony Davis. The longest track, and the one that's the most interesting for me, is a 16.5-minute track called Particle W. And it was actually composed by a guy named Earl Howard, so it's the only non-original track on the album. However, interestingly enough, this piece is actually, looking for the notes here, is for piano and tape. And what this tape is is apparently they don't explain fully, but apparently the tape is a tape of electronics recorded on the Sergei modular music system. It doesn't say who recorded it, so somebody had this modular synthesizer electronic system and recorded these parts onto tape, and Anthony Davis is playing along with the tape. It doesn't say who created the actual music that's on the tape, but I'm wondering if it's Earl Howard, the composer, because basically how this piece works is, I'll read it right here. The piano part consists of a set of detailed instructions which explain how to improvise on each section. So the electronics are very clearly defined, I guess, in terms of how to play against them. So I get the feeling the electronics that are on this tape were not supplied by Anthony Davis. It's the most interesting piece on the album. I really like it. It's difficult stuff. It's not easy listening, but it's not fists on the keyboard kind of thing either. I really do wish I had this on CD. And I'm kind of pissed that I spent an entire day copying the vinyl over to my computer, chopping the tracks up and separating them out and titling them and all that stuff, only to find that YouTube has a much better quality copy of it on there. And I'm sure it came from CD because I'm not hearing noise, or if it came from album, it's a hell of a lot better quality pressing than what I have. The Middle Passage, interesting album, and when I look at it now, it makes me sad too, because the whole Gramavision, man, did they put out some great albums in the late 80s, mid to late 80s when they started. And they're gone, they're gone now. So that's quite a sad thing for me. Let me show you what else I'm listening to. And this is one of my new purchases, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because Daryl Washington had sent me a 2 CD set of 2 hours of basically as a mixtape of various artists. And there was this one track on there by somebody I'd never heard of before named Dickie Landry. And there was a track on there. By the way, this is the album that's playing in the background. If you can hear it or not, I'm not sure, because I actually have my window open, which is unusual because I do that maybe two or 3 days out of the whole year. But there's a piece playing now that was on this mix CD that Daryl Washington sent me called Alto Flute Quad Delay. About a 10-minute piece. I loved it. Kind of sounds like minimalistic, multiple flute parts going on. Very beautiful. When I heard that piece, it floored me. And I'm like, I'd never heard of this guy. I got to find out more about this. And I found very quickly the album that it's from, which was something called 15 Saxophones. And it's an album originally from 1977. Originally was released in 77. So it was a vinyl release. And it's got about that playing time. It's like a 42-minute album. And I decided to take a look at it online to see what I could learn about it. And by the way, the CD reissue is from December 2010. This album was apparently out of print for a lot of years, but it came out in the late 70s. And it was one of those things that, was on a small label, I guess, and went out of print. It's on the label that's released it now is called Unseen Worlds, but I don't necessarily think that's the original label. But I do know, because this was a vinyl release, and because the playing time allows for it, that this 2010 reissue actually came out on vinyl and CD. I'm not a vinyl junkie, and I don't want to deal with the noise, especially in quiet things like this. But there are vinyl copies out there and available, actually. They're about $25 when I saw them online. I wanted to get the CD copy because I wanted something that was quiet that I could keep. What's on here? That roughly 10-minute piece, which is all flutes. Basically, it sounds like 4 flutes playing. I don't know if it's if they're overdubbed necessarily, or whether it was just the delay system that he was using at the time. The other pieces on here are kind of along the same vein. It's all solo, all Dickie Landry. And Dickie Landry, by the way, when I looked him up, I found that I actually have him on some other albums. He was an original member of Philip Glass's ensemble, his first, I guess, New York-based ensemble that Philip Glass had together in the early years, and played with him at least a decade or more in the early years, was a regular full-time member of Philip Glass's first ensemble. There's another piece on here, 15 saxophones, which is about 11 minutes. And the second side is something called Kitchen Solos. Runs just under 22 minutes, which was recorded live at the Kitchen, New York. Kitchen was a performance space in New York. It wasn't a club, it was more of a performance space that was certainly around, at least in the late 70s, early 80s. And you know, I'm trying to think of is it still, it may still be around, I'm not sure. And so what was originally the second side of the album, or if you have the vinyl, it still is the second side of the album, was this 22-minute piece called Kitchen Solos. That's for saxophone. So if you can hear it in what's going on in the background, this is the flute part, but the rest of the album is solo saxophones. Just Dickie Landry and various delays using the saxophone. Again, it doesn't ever get real raucous. Sometimes on occasion, the Kitchen Solo stuff, which is basically a live performance in this performance space that probably wasn't actually built and developed for sound. That sound is maybe a slightly more raw sound. Definitely an interesting avant-garde album. And even these copies of the reissues were not easy to come by. The vinyl, oddly enough, is actually easier to come by than the CD. I only found one online company selling the CD at a reasonable price. Somebody wanted over $200 for a sealed CD copy from this reissue from 2000, and then I found a company in California, mail order company, selling it for standard CD price. But oddly enough, the vinyl I saw on places like Amazon and all that for about $25. Sealed, new copies of the reissue on vinyl. Read up on Dickie Landry a little bit because I think he's got a Wikipedia entry from Louisiana area, and has apparently moved back there in recent years. So he was in New York for a number of years playing in Philip Glass's ensemble, and did some solo recordings, none of which I've heard. I never heard anything until Daryl sent me that tape. And I really like this. Really like this. The flute piece alone is something you can put on repeat and just fall asleep to in the best way. But it's an interesting album. I'm glad I have it. I don't think I would have ever discovered it on my own because I have him playing in Philip Glass's ensemble on several discs, but I don't sit there memorizing the names of everybody in his ensemble. Something else that I've shown here, which is going to send me on a little bit of a jaunt here, but Copeland portrait, a guy named Trammell Starks, who's a keyboard player. I think he's probably somebody that does a lot of backing for other people, and I think I saw he's doing a lot of other things. Like I think he does. I don't know if it's instrumental, but he does like a tribute to Norah Jones album and all that. But that's not where I found him. And the reason I bought this Copeland portrait, which is fantastic. I've showed this, which is Trammell all on keyboards, all on synthesizer, and it's not new. This was recorded in the early '90s, sometime in the early '90s. I want to say like '92. I want to say. He does just Aaron Copland pieces, totally on his own, all on synthesizer, but good samples used, so it really does sound like an orchestra. Fantastic album. If you like Copland's music at all, probably even if you don't, Copeland is a fairly accessible composer, I think. Sorry guys, I'm trying to do two things here at once, and I'm not doing either terribly well. But this is a real good album. This is a real good album, and it still appears to be in print. Sometimes it's hard to tell online. Just because things are available as new copies doesn't necessarily mean they're in print. Sometimes they just happen to come across a bunch of copies laying around in the factory somewhere, that are still sealed and new, and then you maybe don't buy them at the time and find out a couple months later it's been out of print all the time, and these copies just come up. I just did that with a David Bedford album, which I'll discuss later if you don't know who he is. saw an album by him where I heard one of the tracks on YouTube that was really good. It was something he wrote for orchestra, and the album's been long out of print. And I saw one copy about 6 or 7 months ago up for sale, and it was still the only reasonably priced new sealed CD copy of this album. And I didn't buy it because with shipping it was like $20 at the time. Right after that, somebody bought it. Like a day after I first saw it, was hemming and hawing about whether I should get it or not. I didn't buy it, and somebody snapped it up, and the next copies that were basically new copies were ridiculously priced, $50 or so. Oddly enough, wait 6 or 7 months, now all of a sudden this particular Dave Bedford album, there's all these copies available, new sealed, for $8 on the same album. And this is the one case where I'm glad I waited. So I ordered it, and I'll report a little bit on that once I really get to hear the full thing. But that's the way these oddball musical CDs go. Really, the samples he used here for the early '90s are incredible. It really does sound like an orchestra. It's a really pretty album. There's a version of, and probably my least favorite thing is the 3.5-minute version of Fanfare for the Common Man. And maybe that's because I just got the damn thing burned in my head from that Emerson, Lake and Palmer version of it. It kind of prevents me from enjoying any further versions of it. How I came across, because I probably wouldn't have bought that Copeland thing if it weren't for the fact that I was so desperate to hear some more Trammell Stark's music, because he has almost nothing that's original music. Like I said, he's been doing this, these like this tribute to Norah Jones thing, and things, that kind of things where it's not really. I think he did Christmas albums. And he also did a couple albums later on that were... Well, let me show you the albums I got into him. There's this label. Came around 1990 and very, very quickly disappeared. I wonder if Carm might be the only guy who might know this that is like a regular watcher. The label is actually pro jazz, but it's pro jazz / new age. It was a very small label, American label. And I remember, this goes back to the record store days. I remember going to the new age bins at the record store because obviously they were around and available back then. And, going through miscellaneous stuff just to see what's there. And coming across this series of albums that looked interesting on this label, Pro Jazz. Kind of like, I want to say, Wyndham Hillish, in that a lot of the direction of their music seemed to stem more in the acoustic direction. They had a bunch of acoustic piano solo discs, acoustic guitar solo discs, and that's their sampler. Had artists that may or may not mean anything to you. A guy named Robert Strickland, who was a pianist, who recorded at least a couple albums for them solo. Let me see. Trammell Starks, which is how I discovered him. A guy named Dan Estream, who's a guitarist. And John Holmquist, who's a guitarist. So they guitar duo album, I guess. Trammell Starks and Brian Jobson. This is a good sampler. Very nice, pretty music. And by the way, if you do, this is from 1990. If you find used copies, which I think I did see were available still, and you really just want to sample some of these guys you haven't heard, and you can get it for inexpensive, and man, is it pretty music. I mean, this is one of those things that could be background if you wanted it to be, and it would certainly be appreciated by people who aren't necessarily jazz fans. But I came across this label. I'd never heard of it. Didn't know anybody else who ever heard of it either. And within a few weeks had picked up a couple things by them. I have that, and I have this guy Brian Jobson, who I've never heard of before or since, First Light, which is an acoustic guitar album, strictly solo acoustic guitar. I could put this on and you would say that's an early Windham Hill. That's exactly what it sounds like. Pretty. Wow, I paid $13.99 for this. I thought they were more reasonably priced than that. The sampler I only paid $6.99 for, so that was new. That was at the time. And but the ones that really clinched it for me are these two absolutely fantastic albums that I paid $9.99 for each, new, by Trammell Starks, an electronic keyboardist. And these two, anybody that likes new age music at all, electronic keyboards, this I really recommend. Very accessible. There's nothing avant-garde about it. Very pretty. Northern Lights and September Vision. Both of these are about 40 to 45 minutes long. They're fairly short albums. These are really the only two albums that I've seen of his that were really, and there may be others, but these are the only two that I'm aware of that are his own original music. The first one, I'm sure these were recorded back to back. They were released really close together. And you could hear it's all the same keyboards being used on the albums, all the same settings, so there's not obviously different equipment involved. And it's just solo keyboards, all electronic. Northern Lights, the music is a slightly more electronically tinged, whereas September Vision uses more of a piano sound. It's definitely an early sample digital piano. And it doesn't affect me, but some people will find it too brittle and harsh. Not the music, the sound of the piano. The early days of sampling, because this would have been recorded probably 89 or 88. The early days of sampling, the piano samples were not that good. They were very thin and tinny sounding. And you could definitely tell this is a sampled piano on here. The first album, the Northern Lights, doesn't really have too many or any samples of piano. This one is a little bit more piano sounding based, but the piano sounds all surrounded by electronics. So that really helps to kind of smooth out the brittleness, that harsh digital sound of the first sampled pianos. It doesn't bother me unless you're sitting there comparing it to the sound of an acoustic piano, which may have been what he was going for at the time, and that was the best you could do. But if that doesn't bother you, and if you're not listening to it as, oh, this should have been an acoustic piano, the music is fine on both of these discs. Later on, and I haven't found this one yet, he came out with a couple albums. One was called Evening Storms, one was called Gentle Storms. The Evening Storms one basically took tracks from these two albums and selected a few of them, and then, and I hate when they do this, put nature sounds and like the Evening Storm sounds around it. I didn't buy the one called Gentle Storms, which I think was the same. I think he took a bunch of tracks of his from these albums and kind of put some naturey sounds and wind and rain and thunder and stuff like that around them. Really distracting for me. And I actually did buy the one. I bought the Evening Storms when it came out years later. I believe that one came out like in '96. So it was a number of years later on, on a different label even. Because I think this whole Pro Jazz label thing just disappeared very quick. Yeah, and if you look at the catalog numbers, Northern Lights is Pro Jazz New Age number 6004. September Vision is 6005. So these two records would have been released one right after the other. So I'm sure they came from probably the same sessions. They're fantastic. There are plenty of used copies, and in some cases new copies of those two available, and I highly recommend them. There's also one compilation album that was unlike that's this one where he added the sounds of the storms, which to me kind of ruins the music. He did do a compilation, so if you're looking around to get one of those albums and can't find those individual albums, I would look under his name, because I'm not recalling what the name of it was right now. But he did do a compilation of the two albums of Northern Lights and the September album, and kind of put them together without all the nature sounds and all that stuff that came later. It's called Meditations, Now, I don't have Meditations, but it is listed as being, pretty much available, and it's got tracks taken from these two albums, and they're really good. And these are those discs that I've been playing since 1990 when I got them. Sometimes a year or two will go by when I don't play them, but as soon as I play them again, they get on my rotation. Because they're just that good. They're very, very accessible, but very pretty, and specifically the Northern Lights one, which is a little more deep in electronics, I really like. And spurred on again by me finding that Copeland album. But unless you really want to hear this music accompanied with storm sounds and thunder and lightning and all that kind of stuff, I would say try to find these two: Northern Lights, September Vision. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. And I got some new things coming. And I've been working on music, and I actually got something done. I actually got, for about 100 hours worth of work, I got about a finished 6-minute piece, which may not sound impressive to anybody, even musicians, but this is my first foray into computer sequencing, writing music. I've always avoided using sequencers and have never used them before, and bought some software about a year ago. I toyed with it for maybe 5 minutes, couldn't figure it out, and gave up on it again. Now that I don't have a job, I kind of revisited it, and the first time I was able to plunk out something on it, I got on a bit of a roll, and I was able to figure out how to do some of these things, and write some things that wouldn't come out if I were physically playing these instruments. So to me, to get 6 minutes done is a big deal, because usually it's not the way I write. I'll record like some kind of basic rhythm track for one section or one piece, and then go on to another section or another piece entirely, and then I end up dropping them all, and nothing ever gets finished. I don't even know what I intended on being in the pieces originally. So it's very rare that I would actually finish all the sections of a single piece, and I did yesterday, about 6 minutes. So that will be out eventually, I guess. Okay, guys, 32 minutes is still longer than I intended on going on for, but just wanted to let you know I'm alive. Thanks for watching, commenting, and I'll be doing these kind of at regular intervals when I don't have marathon things to do, and what I'm listening to currently, and hope it's of some interest to you. I hope everybody's doing well, regardless of when you're watching this, in the middle of the night, during the day, weekends, whenever. Hope everybody's doing well, and I will be back soon.